Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reacts, where today we have ourselves part 4, the finale of a long form review, a series of an album from an act named Paul James, titled Baby's Just Fine. If we switch over to here, we've got the fourth and final video today with the last track of the album. It has 10 songs. We've had 3 videos prior where we've gone through 3 tracks of those in each. Today's video is more of the final track and then an overall conclusion of the album, in addition to my thoughts on the song itself. But we're going to listen through this track today from start till finish, titled Everybody Ain't You, and we're going to hear what we think. Let's go, let's do it. What do we have? I mean, it's kind of dreamy sounding, isn't it? With those guitars and those.
One of a kind. They must be out of their mind. They say you're stinking rich, you can't even pitch, and drove us right into a ditch. They say you walked on the moon. Why'd you come back so soon? They say you're all that and then some. They're dumber than dumb. I can't see where they're coming from, but everybody ain't you.
I like the double tracking of the vocals on the side. I think that's well fleshed out.
For that. With your come on grin, just a dry thirst trap. With your house in the hills and your $1 million smile, a hit and run, but you're always in style. A hey, 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 hey. I see you driving around. Yeah, you're the talk of the town. Like a high-speed train that has no shame. You're a one-person hurricane. You're from somewhere in space.
Nice little break of their rhythm.
Planted lipstick and lace. With a wink of your eye, you make me run and hide. Your love's like a landslide. Everybody ain't you. Thank God that's true, 'cause I would lose my mind if there were 2 of you. Such a lovely face, filled with charm and grace. But more of you is more than I can chew. Angel from heaven, or demon.
A little bit of tension with the harmony there.
You had your way with me. I was under your spell. Head over heels and too far gone. I realize I'm better on my own.
Interesting key change there.
Everybody ain't you.
Was that like another go through of the main sort of like melody in a different key? Was that like a modulation of it? Is that what the lead was based on there, or similar?
Now I see right through.
If that's the case, that's clever.
It was always there, so shiny and new. No, 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 no one else to blame, but I'm done with your game. And I know for sure the world feels the same. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Nice. So I feel like that was one of my favorite Paul James tracks. We're going to talk about this track more in the conclusion, and then we're going to talk about the album as a whole. And so let's just talk about Everybody Ain't You first. I think that the song is about someone who is basically just sick of the shenanigans and antics that other, you know, their other half is up to, constantly feeling belittled or not enough. And you just get to a stage where you kind of like let them know, hey, you're not as special as you think you are. And even if you think you're better than everyone else, everyone's just kind of sick of it anyways, kind of wondering whether they're an angel or a demon in disguise, like it's those sorts of things, whether things are just too sweet or there's too much to handle or too much to chew on. And I feel like that's a story that a lot of people relate to. Either they were the people that were too much or they've dated someone who was. And I feel it's a compelling story, and I'm going to have a quick listen through the rest of the tracks just before we do the final conclusion for the album, just to kind of figure it out. But there are a few songs that are like this within it, which are kind of interesting. But in terms of things I appreciate about this track, I think, first of all, it was the flow, fluidity, and expression from the vocals, both on the main leads and the sides. There was nice vibrato, hidden chest voice across the mains from Paul. And I appreciate the kind of measured tone that we took with it. Sometimes we're called out and it was a bit more intense, but usually it's very sort of conversational, which I think makes sense here. You're not trying to sort of shout at the person shouting at you. The vocals on the side, the call and response to everything like the backing, like Mountain Lady vocals, etc., was great to have them come back together like that. I just like the sort of size of it. It was nice to have the double tracks occasionally on the sides of the stereo field as well to kind of flesh that out and make it seem a bit bigger. And ultimately, we allowed ourselves to tell the story that we needed to, going back to hooks when required, but we also allowed there to be other lead passages to have alternate voices and add a bit more sort of like melodic variety within the mix. I think also it's worth discussing the actual instrumental performance on instruments like the guitar. That guitar solo and the relevant leads that we had throughout the rest of the piece were fantastic. They were really pretty sounding. We had lots of bends and hammer-ons and pull-offs there, and it was never too much, but it was articulate and sophisticated. The initial solo, I think, riffed off of some of the melodic ideas going on within the motif and in the chorus sections, which I think kind of helps to tie them together, even with the key change. But then we had all these other call and responses and overlapping stuff going on within the rest of the track there, which were really gorgeous, some interesting sort of unison notes and unison bends and other points there. Just really elegant, like a bird flying across the sky, nice and free. And I think that it was just a nice sort of measure in the upper range that was a nice sort of like accompaniment to what Paul was doing on the mic. And it was just really nice to have that kind of sense of freshness and trust within the performance, being very proficient as well. The guitar was really well played there, but also just knowing in a 4-minute something track to sort of make the most of that sort of real estate and have an extra bit of spice to it as well. So it's not just the vocals that are handled up. I feel like the actual guitar playing as well as the steel strum parts as well we had in the rhythm section were great. Like they were contrasting, juxtaposed. I mean, we had some kind of like chorusy or like kind of like as parts on the side where we arpeggiate certain chords like dominant sevenths and stuff like that as an additional layer, and those were call and responses to or moments where we used the space. There was just a lot of really neat, intricate layering of the guitars that I feel worked within this piece. And I think I want to talk about the studio production here, because I feel like this is some of the cleanest studio production that we've had across the entire album to this point. I loved the tone and position of the vocals within the mix, as well as the backing parts, the guitars, bass, drums, everything else were really neatly kind of like flowing around the piece. There was dynamic range between the more sort of like clean or chorusy parts going into the heavy overdriven or distorted parts there. The key change was flawless. Nothing ever felt too squeezed. There was like movement in stereo field between the center and the sides there. Things got bigger and smaller depending. They kind of expanded and came into itself. And, that was nice to level that punk so the bus compression limiting was handled. There was dynamic range and the vocals he sung well, so the notes were kept, and I feel like they had a great presence in the mix and amongst all the other elements within their mix as well. So ultimately I feel like it was the vocals, the guitar playing specific to this track. And there was other things I appreciated about this. It's just me sort of like talking about a few things that really sort of stood out for me. And these sort of like, I could quote unquote reaction videos. If we were to do a whole sort of like full song analysis, it'd probably take twice as long. But we're going to talk about the album now, because there's nothing that I feel would need to be changed within this track here. Everybody Ain't You. And so welcome to the conclusion of my review of this album from an act named Paul James, titled Baby It's Just Fine, after, the walkthrough, the talk-through of Everybody Ain't You. So these are my overall thoughts on this album from what I've heard across the last few videos. It's a different experience for me because I'm used to sort of listening through the album in one sitting and then giving my thoughts. But we're going to try our best to kind of like give our, because it's quite a journey here. From the very beginning with the mixture of tracks that we had, Without You, Giving Hell to Me, My Whole Life, all the way to Everybody Ain't You. It's kind of like a variety box of different pieces with different production qualities, different sort of like mixes and different arrangements and different styles. And I feel that this is more of an album of Paul James discussing simply what they wanted to talk about, their own personal experiences, very true and vivid to them. It's not necessarily an album where we had every single track flowing in a specific direction. It's more Paul James's sort of variety box showing you what he's managed to accomplish as well as the people that he's worked with. And that's the kind of concept of it. I mean, like, there are some tracks where we talk about bars and, like, going drinking and stuff like that, like Lucky Spot and Back Alley Pisser. There are songs about relationships, like Without You and Giving Hell to Me and My Whole Life and Everybody Ain't You. There are songs which serve, there are like connections between them, but they're not like the exact same topic. They're like different parts of the thing we're discussing, different angles of it. And I think that there will be stories across this album that will resonate with some people and others that'll resonate with others. And that's just the nature of music and the human experience. But I just want to preface that as that it's very much Paul James putting his life out there, his own thoughts and experiences out there, as opposed to writing about a larger topic. And I think that's just fine. When you say, baby, it's just fine, it's almost commenting on their existence themselves and saying whatever kind of chaos I've been through, it'll work out. If I was to look at three main areas that I thought were done well across these tracks, the first one I would imagine that would be relevant would be the vocal takes. I think that whether we had just Paul James by themselves or like backing vocals going on, we had a consistency with our approach or expression within it. We knew what notes we wanted to hit. We had good vocal technique. We were confident in our head and chest voice there. We had some vibratos occasionally. We navigated some more sort of like complicated arrangements, and other times they were a bit more sort of like laid back, and we didn't need to do as much. I think there was a lot of different styles of music throughout this album. A lot of it was country. And we had this kind of like warm kind of glow and kind of southern blend to it, which I think suited it really neatly. But then you look at Without You, which is just it's a grandiose ballad there. There is contrast within it there. We really, I think, were trying to create music that specifically suited the tone or the subject matter that we were making, and that gives us flexibility as musicians. But we managed to sort of like sing the way that made sense for it, emotively, expressively, note-wise, working well with the scales and key signatures involved, changing when required without issue, never feeling like we were restraining ourselves. It was very good. And I think whenever the backing vocals did come in with our column responses or like together, there was an inherent purpose to that made sense within the piece. I know it's such a basic sounding thing to say, but you really cannot take for granted the utility of things that appear within a song. Everything needs to matter in order for it to be a meaningful experience. And so to have some of it and then more, or to develop over time, or to simply have them in certain parts of the track to signal different points, it's just sensible songwriting and performance there. So the vocals were handled well. I think the second thing I'm going to talk about here is the production value. So I think that there were some songs, like Without You and like Everybody Ain't You, that I think were written a bit later on, where we seemed to be more comfortable with the tone and the sound we were wanting to go for there. The recordings of the vocals, guitar, bass, everything, strings, etc., everything there made a lot of sense, and it was easy to sort of listen to go, yeah, this sounds commercial grade. There were some songs that were written on, as I understand it, a little bit earlier, like Baby It's Just Fine, My Whole Life, and potentially even Back Alley Pisser. Where like with these earlier tracks, there is some fragmenting and some issues with how some of them sound. Like it's a bit of kind of digital warping or something like that. Back Alley Pisser, there's like kind of a glitchiness to the tone of some of the parts there, which I think is just occasional to some of the sounds within the piece, but it is distracting. So I think one of the things I want to sort of show as a positive is how we grew over time with the sound there, the mixing of levels, like Baby's Just Fine, My Whole Life there. There were some parts like the strings on the side, for example, being a bit like quieter than some other parts in the middle, like balancing out the stereo field there, working things to sort of seem a bit smoother, so that by the time we got to Without You and Everybody Ain't You, it was again, as I said, commercial grade. I think having Without You as the first track on the album is a good way to let people know, hey, this is going to be a journey, so at least with the first track sounding as sort of like clean as it is, there might be a bit of funkiness in here occasionally, and that's just part of the journey. I think at our high points, we were very comfortable with the recording of the vocals. They were nicely panned and EQ'd well. Any of the guitar, bass, drum, keys, string takes, any other instruments included within this, I'm not remembering off the top of my head. There were no real issues aside from the digital fragmentation and occasional sort of late labeling stuff that I talked about it that improved as we went along. There was typically dynamic range to these tracks. Some of them started immediately, others sort of built up over time. Either way, ultimately, I'm happy that we had. I think it's worth, being genuine in the fact that I feel it's courageous to be aware of how things have grown and still want to keep that within your album. Sometimes you'll have people nowadays who will maybe look back at their older stuff and go, it's not the same level as the stuff I'm doing now, so I'm not sure if I want to put it together. But for Paul James, again, it's putting out an album that is their journey with their music, and it's a very sort of, again, authentic experience for them. So I'm proud of them for doing that. I think it's really neat. And it just makes it seem a bit more real, a bit more likable, a bit more believable. They're just putting these stories out, singing them well, and then the experience with the production is as it is. And typically it's really good. It's really complicated, I suppose, to talk about the instrumental performances as a whole because these songs each have different makeups. There are lots of interesting guitar solo and lead elements there with the steel strings and acoustics and lead parts. There were some distorted solos that were really fantastic, exploring scales and modes and eloquently. We typically played in a way that made sense with the style of music they were doing, worked well within key signatures and scales, and then we changed stuff up as required depending on the mood and we typically understood the nuance needed to establish a connection between the guitar and the rest of the elements within the mix. Typically the drums were now played there, whether it was quarters, eighths, triplets, or 16ths or beyond that. They made a great entrance to the mix, whether it was straight 4/4 or swing eighths. There were no points where I was like, oh, the drums are a bit off, really, as far as I remember. I might have mentioned that in the specific kind of like mini conclusion of that track. But across the board, for the most part at least, the rhythm and sort of like tempo was tight, and the drums were a great sort of ground bed and anchor for everything else going on. And there were fiddles and strings, as I mentioned, other elements there, such as, back in Back Alley Pisser. There was compositionally, we understood that we could not leave the list in without things adapting and changing as we go through. We knew that if we stayed on a set of instruments for too long doing the same thing, it would become uninteresting. So we would add parts on the side there, and they were performed well as well. But they typically work through the scales, like the country scales and major minors as well, really neatly. And I think there were even some moments with The Man in Your Mind where we had a trumpet, which was really beautiful there. I really enjoyed that one. Sincerely, it was a beautiful sound to it. We had this kind of ethereal glow to some of the guitar takes or pads on the side as well. It kind of blew my mind a little bit. It really is a variety box, this one. And even when we had pianos and Baby, it's just fine. They explored the triads really neatly. Both heads were stellar and consistent. And so yeah, ultimately it was the fundamentals of the guitar, bass and drums and sort of those key instruments that were in a lot of those situations, whilst also allowing the piano to sort of be a similar accompanying position to the guitar takes, unless they were sort of soloing there. The trumpet and sort of fiddles or other instruments is kind of icings on the cake there, alternate solos for a specific kind of mood. And yeah, we understood how to balance the sometimes and the always parts with the vocals, and we recorded them neatly. So ultimately, I feel like those are my thoughts on the album as a whole. Those are the parts I appreciate. I could say, for example, in terms of constructive feedback, that maybe we could potentially sort of try and get the kind of occasional glitchy textures out of future tracks, but I feel like that's redundant because we understand, we have worked through this journey that the next album that Paul James will put out probably wouldn't have those kind of production issues there. It's a learning curve. It's really hard to get an album perfect in terms of production, especially on the first go, unless you go through a studio and unless you just get someone who's done 1 billion albums to do it for you. And even then, it's when you're writing music, you've got to figure out how it needs to sound. Fantastic work overall. No real complaints about it. I think that it's a very unique experience, and I'm thankful I got the chance to hear it out in its totality. So thank you for watching my review of this track from an actor named Paul James, and this album, should I say. The track being Everybody Ain't You and the album being Baby's Just Fine. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via the various social medias and their YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as I need the help more than ever thought of crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SB Reacts. Spiderhands out.